What happens when a legendary diva meets a host who refuses to back down? You won't believe what unfolds when entertainment royalty sits across from Kelly Clarkson in what was supposed to be a light-hearted promotional appearance. This explosive confrontation had viewers glued to their screens as tensions escalated from polite conversation to full-blown warfare in a matter of minutes. The night started innocently enough, but what transpired next would leave the audience speechless, and one of music's biggest icons walking off set in a fury that nobody saw coming. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds. The Kelly Clarkson Show studio buzzed with its usual pre-taping energy as crew. Members made final adjustments to the lighting and sound equipment. Cher, draped in a flowing black ensemble that sparkled under the studio lights, settled into the guest chair with the practiced ease of someone who had graced countless talk show stages over her 6-decade career. Her signature long hair cascaded over her shoulders as she exchanged pleasantries with the makeup team, exuding the confidence that had made her a global icon. Kelly Clarkson bounced onto the set with her trademark enthusiasm, her bright smile masking what would soon reveal itself as a calculated agenda. The cameras rolled, capturing what appeared to be a warm welcome between two powerhouse women in entertainment. The audience, packed with fans eager to see the legendary performer, applauded enthusiastically as Kelly launched into her opening remarks. "We have the incomparable Cher here tonight," Kelly announced, her voice carrying that familiar Texas twang that had endeared her to millions. I mean, when I say legend, I'm talking about someone who has literally defined what it means to reinvent yourself in this business. The compliment seemed genuine enough, but those who knew Kelly's interviewing style could detect something sharper lurking beneath the surface. Cher smiled graciously, her hands folded in her lap as she prepared for what she assumed would be the typical promotional circuit questions about her latest projects. She had weathered decades of interviews, from hard-hitting journalism to fluff pieces, and this appeared to fall squarely in the latter category. The icon's guard was completely down as she settled in for what she expected to be another pleasant chat show appearance. "So, Cher, let's talk about your new album," Kelly began, leaning forward with apparent interest. "But first, I have to ask about something that's been making headlines recently. There's been a lot of discussion about older artists and their relevance in today's music landscape. Some critics are saying that maybe it's time for certain performers to step back and let the younger generation take the spotlight." The question hung in the air like a live wire. Cher's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, her eyes narrowing slightly as she processed what had just been said. This wasn't the softball question she had anticipated. The studio audience remained silent, sensing the sudden change in atmosphere, but not yet understanding the gravity of what was unfolding. "I'm sorry. What exactly are you asking me?" Cher responded, her voice maintaining its measured tone, but with an edge that hadn't been there moments before. Her posture straightened, and those who knew her well would have recognized the warning signs of a woman who had not become a 6-decade entertainment survivor by backing down from confrontation. Kelly's smile never wavered, but her eyes gleamed with something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. "Well, I'm just curious about your thoughts on the idea that maybe there's an expiration date on pop stardom. I mean, you've had an incredible run, but do you ever think about gracefully stepping aside for the next generation of artists?" The words hit like a slap across the face. Cher's legendary composure cracked just enough to reveal the fire burning underneath. She had faced criticism throughout her career, weathered personal attacks, and survived industry politics that would have destroyed lesser performers. But this felt different. This felt personal and deliberately cruel, disguised as journalistic inquiry. "Gracefully stepping aside," Cher repeated, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. "Are you suggesting that I'm past my prime, Kelly? Because if that's what you're implying, You might want to check your facts before you come for someone who was selling out arenas before you were even born." The audience stirred uncomfortably, caught between their loyalty to both women and their growing awareness that they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't the gentle sparring that sometimes occurred on talk shows. This was the beginning of something much more serious. Kelly laughed, but it sounded forced and hollow in the sudden tension of the studio. "Oh no, I'm not suggesting anything like that. I'm just asking questions that I think our audience wants to hear answered. I mean, you have to admit, there's a conversation happening in the industry about legacy artists and their place in modern music." A conversation started by whom? Cher shot back, her famous voice carrying decades of authority and barely contained anger. "Show me these critics you're talking about. Show me these headlines, because what I'm hearing sounds like a host who's fishing for controversy to boost her ratings rather than actually engaging with her guest." The accusation landed with devastating accuracy. Kelly's carefully constructed facade began to crack as she realized that Cher wasn't going to play along with whatever game plan had been prepared. The legend sitting across from her had survived Hollywood's golden age, the music industry's most turbulent decades, and personal struggles that would have broken most people. She wasn't about to be intimidated by a talk show host looking for viral moments. "I think you're being a little sensitive," Kelly replied, her voice taking on a condescending tone that would prove to be a crucial mistake. "I'm just doing my job as an interviewer. These are legitimate questions about the industry." Cher's eyes flashed with an intensity that made several audience members lean back in their seats. "Sensitive? Sensitive?" Her voice rose for the first time, carrying the full power of a woman who had commanded stages from Las Vegas to Broadway. "Let me tell you something about sensitivity, honey. I've been in this business longer than you've been alive. I've earned every single accolade, every award, every moment of respect through decades of hard work and talent. And you're going to sit there and suggest that I should step aside because I'm too old?" The studio fell into a stunned silence. This was no longer a talk show appearance. This was a master class in how to handle disrespect, delivered by someone who had faced down much tougher opponents than Kelly Clarkson. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what would soon become legendary television. Kelly's smile finally disappeared entirely, replaced by a look of someone who had vastly underestimated her opponent. "I never said you were too old. I'm just asking about the natural evolution of the industry." "Natural evolution?" Cher laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let me tell you about natural evolution. Natural evolution is when talent, experience, and artistry are valued over cheap shots and manufactured drama. What you're doing right now isn't journalism, it's ambush television. And frankly, it's beneath both of us." The tension in the studio had become palpable. Crew members exchanged worried glances, unsure whether to continue filming or call for a break. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing a confrontation that would be talked about for years to come. But this was only the beginning of what would become one of the most explosive talk show moments in television history. Kelly's true colors were starting to show, as she realized her carefully planned attack was backfiring spectacularly. Instead of backing down, she doubled down on her approach, setting the stage for an even more dramatic confrontation that would leave viewers questioning everything they thought they knew about daytime television. The host's jaw tightened as she processed Cher's devastating response. Rather than acknowledging the validity of the legend's points, or attempting to salvage the interview with grace, Kelly made a decision that would transform this moment from uncomfortable television into something far more sinister. Her media training kicked in, but not in the way her producers had intended. "Well, I think our audience deserves honesty," Kelly said, her voice taking on a tone that was both patronizing and aggressive. "And honestly, Cher, I've been watching your recent performances, and I have to say, there's been some concern about your vocal abilities. Social media has been pretty harsh about your last few concerts." The words dropped like a bomb in the studio, Even the camera operators stopped their subtle adjustments, frozen by the audacity of what they had just witnessed. Kelly Clarkson, herself a vocal powerhouse, had just questioned the singing ability of one of the most celebrated voices in music history. The disrespect was so brazen, so calculated, that it left the audience gasping. Cher's face transformed. The measured composure she had maintained despite the previous provocations evaporated instantly. Her eyes blazed with a fury that seemed to electrify the very air around her. This wasn't just about age or relevance anymore. This was about attacking the very foundation of her artistry, the instrument that had carried her through decades of success. "Excuse me." Cher's voice was deadly quiet, but it carried the weight of someone who had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "Did you just question my vocal abilities? Did you just sit there and suggest that Cher, the woman who has sold over 100 million records worldwide, somehow doesn't know how to sing anymore?" Kelly realized she had stepped into dangerous territory, but instead of retreating, she pressed forward with the reckless abandon of someone who had committed fully to destruction. "I'm not saying you don't know how to sing. I'm saying that time affects everyone. And maybe it's time to be realistic about what your voice can handle now versus what it could handle 20 years ago." The audience was in complete shock. Several people in the front row had their hands over their mouths, unable to believe what they were witnessing. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was character assassination disguised as journalism, and everyone in the studio knew it. Cher stood up slowly, her full height and presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. The movement was deliberate, powerful, and unmistakably threatening. "Let me tell you something about my voice, little girl," she said, her words dripping with decades of earned authority. "This voice has performed in front of presidents, royalty, and millions of fans who would line up around the block to hear it again. This voice has earned Grammy Awards, Emmy Awards, and an Oscar. This voice has survived longer than your entire career, and it will be remembered long after your 15 minutes are up." Kelly's facade was crumbling rapidly. The calculated cruelty was backfiring in ways she hadn't anticipated. Instead of creating a viral moment that would boost her ratings, she was creating a public relations nightmare that would haunt her for years. But her pride wouldn't let her back down. "Now I understand you're defensive," Kelly said, her voice rising to match Cher's intensity. "But I'm trying to have an honest conversation about the music industry. Our viewers appreciate authenticity, and I think they deserve to hear these questions asked." "Defensive?" Cher laughed, but it was a sound that chilled everyone in the studio. "Honey, I'm not defensive. I'm offended. I'm disgusted. And frankly, I'm embarrassed for you. You invited me here under false pretenses, and now you're trying to humiliate me on national television. What kind of person does that?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. Kelly's true character was being exposed in real time, and she was failing the test spectacularly. The audience could see through her fake concern and manufactured controversy. This wasn't journalism. This was cruelty for ratings. "I think you're overreacting," Kelly replied, her voice taking on a shrill quality that revealed her growing desperation. "These are valid industry discussions. If you can't handle tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." The moment Kelly said those words, she sealed her fate. The studio audience audibly gasped, several people shaking their heads in disbelief. She had just told one of the most interviewed performers in history that she couldn't handle tough questions. The arrogance was breathtaking. Cher's response was swift and devastating. "Can't handle tough questions? Tough questions?" Her voice echoed through the studio with the power of someone who had conquered every stage, from the Hollywood Bowl to Caesar's Palace. "I've been answering tough questions since before you were born. I've faced down critics, industry executives, and tabloid reporters who would eat you alive. But what you're doing isn't tough questioning. It's cheap, it's cruel, and it's completely unprofessional." Kelly's composure finally cracked completely. Her mask of journalistic integrity fell away, revealing the petty, jealous person underneath. Well, maybe if you weren't so sensitive about your age and your declining abilities, we could have a normal conversation. The words echoed through the studio like a death knell. Kelly had just confirmed what everyone already suspected. This wasn't about journalism or honest conversation. This was about a host who had decided to use her platform to attack a legend for no reason other than her own twisted entertainment. Cher's reaction was immediate and devastating. Her eyes narrowed to slits, and when she spoke, her voice carried the full weight of 6 decades in the entertainment industry. Declining abilities, declining abilities. Let me tell you something about declining abilities, sweetheart. I'm still selling out arenas while you're struggling to keep this pathetic excuse for a talk show on the air. I'm still making music that matters while you're desperately trying to stay relevant by attacking your betters. The audience erupted in shocked murmurs. This was beyond uncomfortable television. This was a public evisceration, and Kelly had brought it entirely on herself. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what would become one of the most talked-about confrontations in television history. Kelly's face flushed red with humiliation and rage. She had expected to control this narrative, to create a moment that would showcase her as a tough interviewer willing to ask hard questions. Instead, she had revealed herself as a bully who preyed on guests under the guise of journalism. I don't have to sit here and be insulted by someone who's clearly past her prime, Kelly shot back, her voice cracking with emotion. This is my show, and I'll ask whatever questions I want to ask. The moment those words left her lips, Kelly realized she had made a fatal mistake. The studio fell into a silence so complete that the hum of the cameras seemed deafening. Cher stood there towering over the seated host, her presence filling the entire studio with an energy that was both magnificent and terrifying. "Past my prime," Cher repeated, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more power than a scream. "Your show? Your show?" She gestured around the studio with a sweep of her arm that encompassed not just the set, but the entire entertainment industry. "Let me tell you something about shows, honey. I've been putting on shows since you were in diapers. I've commanded stages that you could never even dream of playing. And right now, I'm about to put on the greatest show of all, showing the world exactly who Kelly Clarkson really is." The threat hung in the air like a promise. This was no longer just a confrontation between two entertainers. This was a masterclass in power, respect, and the consequences of crossing someone who had earned their place in history through talent, perseverance, and an unshakable sense of self-worth. Kelly sat frozen in her chair, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had unleashed. But it was too late for apologies, too late for damage control, and far too late to salvage any dignity from this disaster. The legend standing before her was about to deliver a finale that would be remembered long after Kelly's show was canceled and forgotten. Cher took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling with the controlled power of someone who had spent decades mastering not just her voice, but her presence. The studio lights caught the sparkle in her outfit, but it was nothing compared to the fire burning in her eyes. This wasn't just about defending herself anymore. This was about teaching a lesson that needed to be learned. "You know what, Kelly?" Cher said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned every syllable. "I came here tonight as a courtesy. I came here to promote my work, to connect with fans, and to have what I thought would be a respectful conversation between two professionals. But what I found instead was a small, petty person who thought she could use my name and my reputation to create drama for her failing show." The words hit Kelly like physical blows. Each sentence was carefully constructed, delivered with the precision of someone who understood the power of language and timing. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing a masterclass in how to handle disrespect with dignity and strength. Kelly tried to interrupt, her voice weak and desperate. "Cher, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No," Cher cut her off with a single word that carried the weight of absolute authority. "There's been no misunderstanding. You planned this. You brought me here with the intention of humiliating me, of making yourself look tough and relevant at my expense. But what you've done instead is shown the world exactly who you really are." The legend began to move around the chair, her presence commanding every inch of the studio. The cameras followed her automatically, drawn by the magnetic force of someone who had been performing for audiences for over 60 years. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. This was a performance, and Cher was giving the audience something they would never forget. "You want to talk about declining abilities?" Cher continued, her voice rising with controlled passion. "Let me tell you about abilities, sweetheart. The ability to respect your guests, the ability to conduct a professional interview, the ability to treat people with basic human decency. Those are abilities you clearly never developed." Kelly's face had gone pale. Her earlier bravado completely evaporated. She looked small and insignificant in her chair, dwarfed by the presence of the woman she had so foolishly chosen to attack. The audience could see the contrast clearly now. One woman was a legend who had earned her place in history, while the other was a pretender who had just revealed her true character. "You asked me about stepping aside for the younger generation," Cher said, her voice taking on a tone that was both maternal and menacing. "Well, let me tell you something about the younger generation. The good ones, the ones with real talent and integrity, they don't need to tear down their predecessors to make themselves look good. They learn from us. They respect us. They understand that this business is about lifting each other up, not tearing each other down." The indictment was complete and devastating. Kelly had been exposed not just as a bad interviewer, but as a bad person. The audience could see it, the crew could see it, and most importantly, the cameras were capturing every moment of this epic destruction. "But you," Cher continued, pointing directly at Kelly with a finger that seemed to carry the weight of judgment itself, "you represent everything that's wrong with this industry. You're jealous, you're cruel, and you're completely without class. You thought you could use my name to create your pathetic little viral moment, but what you've created instead is a monument to your own unprofessionalism." Kelly finally found her voice, but it came out as a desperate whisper. "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to—" "Oh, now you're sorry." Cher's laugh was magnificent in its disdain. "Now you're sorry? After you've questioned my relevance, attacked my voice, and insulted my career? Your apology is as fake as everything else about you, honey. You meant every word you said, and we both know it." The audience was completely mesmerized. This wasn't just television anymore. This was justice being served in real time, and everyone in the studio knew they were witnessing something historic. Cher had transformed from guest to judge, jury, and executioner, and Kelly was powerless to stop it. "You know what the really sad part is?" Cher continued, her voice taking on a tone of almost pity. "You actually had talent once. I remember when you won that singing competition. You had a voice. You had potential. You had the opportunity to build something meaningful. But somewhere along the way, you chose to become this, a bitter, jealous person who builds herself up by tearing others down." The psychological destruction was complete. Kelly sat in her chair, looking like a scolded child, her carefully constructed television persona in ruins around her. The woman who had started this interview with such confidence and malicious intent was now a broken, humiliated shell of herself. "I've been in this business for 6 decades, Cher said, her voice rising to fill every corner of the studio. "I've worked with the greatest entertainers who ever lived. I've performed for presidents and paupers, for royalty and rebels. I've seen the best and the worst of what this industry has to offer. And in all those years, through all those experiences, I have never encountered such blatant disrespect and unprofessionalism." The words echoed through the studio like a final judgment. Kelly's career wasn't just damaged, it was destroyed. The audience knew it, the crew knew it, and most importantly, Kelly knew it. She had picked a fight with a legend and lost in the most spectacular way possible. Cher moved toward her purse, which sat on the small table next to her chair. The movement was deliberate, final, and unmistakably dismissive. "I'm done here," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of absolute finality. "I came here to promote my work. But what I'm going to promote instead is something far more important. The idea that talent, experience, and respect still matter in this business." She picked up her purse with the same grace she had shown throughout the confrontation, her movements elegant and controlled despite the emotional intensity of the moment. The audience watched in fascination as she prepared to leave, knowing they were witnessing the end of something significant. "And Kelly," Cher said, turning back to face the broken host one final time, "when you're looking for someone to blame for what just happened here, don't look at me. Look in the mirror. This is what happens when you mistake cruelty for courage, when you confuse attack journalism with actual talent, and when you forget that respect is earned, not taken." Kelly tried one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. "Please, Cher, can we just—" "No," Cher said with finality that ended all discussion. "We can't. What's done is done, and what's been revealed can't be hidden again. You showed your true colors tonight, and now the world gets to see them too." With that, Cher turned and walked toward the studio exit with her head held high, her posture straight, and her dignity completely intact. The audience erupted in spontaneous applause, not just for the performance they had witnessed, but for the lesson they had learned about strength, grace, and the power of standing up for yourself. The cameras followed her as she moved through the studio, capturing every step of her triumphant exit. She didn't look back, didn't acknowledge the applause, and didn't give Kelly even a moment's consideration. She had said what needed to be said, delivered the justice that needed to be delivered, and now she was simply done. Kelly sat alone in her chair, surrounded by the wreckage of her reputation and the silence of a studio that had just witnessed her complete destruction. The woman who had started the evening thinking she could use a legend for her own purposes had instead become a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and the swift justice that awaits those who mistake cruelty for entertainment. As the studio doors closed behind Cher, the sound echoed through the space like a final punctuation mark on one of the most devastating confrontations in television history. The legend had spoken, the lesson had been taught, and the world had been reminded that some people simply cannot be broken, no matter how hard others might try.